this is like the biggest twist in any murder.
Gangnam Style.
Hmm. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Kimchi Crime Podcast. Now, it's been a couple of weeks that we have since we've recorded. There's a few reasons why. The first week we could maybe blame SJ.
Yeah, I mean, dude, we had like a whole bunch of family stuff, and your family was visiting, my family was visiting. We had a bunch of, some holidays. We had kid stuff. Man, we got family. We got family.
Yeah.
We got jobs. We got other jobs too. So it's been pretty rough.
We may look like losers that just sit in our rooms all day and look at crime, but yeah, unfortunately, this doesn't pay the bills. So,
Nope.
And I think it was 2 weeks ago that Chuseok was around, right? Chuseok being the Korean Thanksgiving.
Boy, dude, that was more than 2 weeks ago, man. That was like almost a month ago, I think.
Okay, anyway,
just around. But yeah, I mean, it's been around. But you know what's interesting is one of the last episodes that we did was on Chodusun, right?
Yeah.
And so right now in Korea, they're talking about the Korean version of the Jessica's Law. You know about the Jessica's Law,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so, I host a radio show here in Korea, and had a chance to talk to a law professor earlier in the week, and we're talking about, Jessica's Law and so forth. And then, Cho Do-sun's stuff started coming out, and the professor goes, a little bit too much about Cho Do-sun. What's going on here? I was like, well, professor, aside from the radio show that I host, I also do a podcast with Walter's Kimchi Crime Podcast. So put a bit of
hopefully he's listening.
Yeah, put a bit of a plug-in on the podcast here. But yeah, I mean, it's, man, even that story, man, it was a tough topic to talk about, huh?
Yeah, it was. One of, like, as I said, anything with children is quite a tough topic. Now, the reason why we've taken about 2 weeks off is because last week I weirdly came up with a long-term hiccup. So basically, I was hiccuping the whole day on Sunday when we usually record this.
Yeah.
And Monday morning and also Saturday morning as well. So I just couldn't record. It would have been the most annoying podcast in the world if I was just every second going, which I was.
That's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. You just had like constant hiccup for 8 hours.
Never happened before. Don't know how it happened. I had to go to the doctor, get some medicine, but like, that's like my biggest fear on air is like hiccuping and just not being able to stop if you're live. So, but anyway, we're not talking about my hiccuping today. We are going to talk about today's case. Now, we're going to go serial killer. I thought that would be a good topic, or a better topic than last time around.
Yeah, he's also, by the way, for our viewers out there, Walter pitched out an idea to talk about Chun Chung-jo, who is right now one of the infamous scam artists right now. I said, Walter, I'm not touching that with a 50-foot pole right now, because we got a bunch of YouTubers getting in trouble for making fun of her and like the victim and stuff like that. But you're right. I think it's a bit of a break from last time, and I think this is a very famous case that we're going to talk about. So tell us, because I know it's gotten to the point where it was inspired by a very famous Korean movie, right?
That's correct. So yeah, today's serial killer was the inspiration for the 2003 K film titled Saturday Chuok, which means, like, I guess, Memories of Murder. It is in English, right?
Yeah.
And it was directed by the very famous Bong Joon-ho. And if anyone's a fan of Parasite, they know that he's the director.
Yeah.
Have you seen that movie?
Oh, I've seen this movie like more than 5 times. It's actually one of my favorite movies. Bong Joon-ho happens to be one of my favorite directors as well, and it's cool stuff, man.
It's good. I really recommend it. I watched it, I think it was today or yesterday, and yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon for Koreans to, let's say, name serial killers after American serial killers. For some reason, American serial killers get the global stage, and every other country has got just the domestic stage.
Right.
But the reason why I say that is because this killer was called the Korean Zodiac Killer. And as we know, the Zodiac Killer in America has still not been found. There's been one person that could have been there, but then it doesn't make sense.
Ted Cruz. They said Ted Cruz.
Ted Cruz.
They said Ted Cruz might be the Zodiac Killer.
We're all waiting for Ted Cruz to come, confront the situation of being the Zodiac Killer. But also he was the Korean Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
Because of his crimes, which we'll talk about a little later. Though we have done Yu Yong-cho, who is extremely infamous and one of the biggest serial killers in Korea, I don't know if this guy could top him. So what do you think, SJ?
Just the sheer idea that you made a good point. He used to be called the Korean Zodiac Killer because he was never found, right? And so now that and even the way that they discovered it was many, many years later on. And so we'll find out later on, because technically this case was technically solved, was what it was. Turns out it wasn't. But this is it's to the point where we're still getting updates right now, but we're going to start things off by going to the past, right, as we always do. We're going to go to 1963 here, specifically on January 31st, when a baby boy by the name of Lee Choon-Jae was born in Hwaseong, Gyeonggi Province. Now, Hwaseong is going to be the main location for today's case, as well as some of the surrounding areas. But just to give you an idea, Hwaseong, I've been there a couple of times, not too far away from where we live. It's quite a small rural town, yet a number of murders and rapes occurred during the mid-'80s. So it's kind of hard to believe that someone could get away with these crimes for so long, because, again, this case actually went unsolved for 30 years, man. 30 years it went.
Right.
But you go back to Lee Choon-Jae over the past episodes here on Kimchi Crime Podcast. A lot of the killers had either, poor education, right, or they were strange students. Lee Choon-Jae was not one of those types of children. In fact, he was social. He was, he had a good head in his shoulder. He just seemed like any normal kid. But obviously, we know that he's not really normal, given the case about him now and what we figured out, and reasons that could have triggered the start of a very troubled future came down to a couple of terrible things that happened in his past. So, Walter, let's kind of have you walk through some of the things that he went through as a child.
Right. And just to go back on Hwaseong, it's a very small rural town, but back in those days, it was
straight up country.
It was as country as you can get. Like, it was, small houses, farms everywhere. There was, I think, a power plant there at one point, but other than that, just imagine being in the middle of nowhere. Korea's small, but still, at that time, no one is around. So just imagine if you lived in a town or a city, a town where there's, let's say roughly 5,000 people, and then like 8-9 people in that area just started dying.
Yeah.
I would not go, I would not walk out my house.
Yeah, and it's just how heinous the crimes were, and of course how brutal the crime scenes looked is the other thing, right?
That is the other thing as well. And if you watch the movie that we mentioned before, you'll see a lot of that as well. But yes, I'm going to get into some of his events that happened when he was a little younger, because there does seem obviously to be a causality or causation between, young traumatic events and what happens to serial killers when in their older years. Serial killers tend to be in their late 20s or 30s. And usually it's followed up from something earlier on.
Yeah.
So some of there are some claims and some true events that happened. But first of all, Lee Choon-Jae, he claimed that he was sexually assaulted. I tried to look into this a little bit more, but that's either confirmed nor denied. So, but, it's still not excusable. I think it was terrible if he did happen to it, but doesn't excuse what he did later on. It was also reported that his younger sibling had drowned. This, I got conflicting reports. One said it was his younger sister, one said it was his younger brother. But either way, Lee Choon-Jae was traumatized by this, but not a lot of sources are pointing out when it happened though in his
Yeah.
childhood. This is also because like usually we have a lot of evidence. As I said, this went unsolved for 30 years, so they don't have a lot of information on this person, to be
No, they're
honest.
just still finding out right now. It's what's going on
Exactly.
right now. Yeah.
Yeah, but from there onward, he lived a life as a normal citizen. He did his mandatory military service. He picked up a couple of, jobs in construction as a crane driver and got married in March 1993. However, he would end his marriage just 9 or 10 months later. Now, Lee Chun-jae's first encounter with the police didn't come until 1989 in September, when he was in his mid-20s. Now, just after midnight, Lee Chun-jae broke into a house located in Suwon. Suwon's close to Hwasong, for
Yeah.
people who don't know. Close to us, to be honest with you. And not too far from where he actually lived. And if you know anything about crime or criminology or anything, you know that a lot of killers or a lot of crime happens usually within the area, like the same area, especially
Mhm.
with serial killers or killers in general. But while he was breaking in, he was caught by the landlord of the house, and the police arrested him. They found weapons on him. So he was obviously wanting to do something, maybe robbery. So he was given 1.5 years in prison in early 1990 for robbery and violence, but later appealed, which saw him only just do a couple of months. Now, Lee Chun-jae's next encounter for the police was a little bit more serious than just a robbery. SJ, can you just go through what happened
Yeah,
next?
he basically jumped it here. Usually like oftentimes you go, petty theft,
Yep.
and then you go, man, I'm kind of bored with petty theft. I'm just gonna go with a burglary this time, and then you go from burglary to, I don't know, assaulting a police officer. So this guy
Mm,
really jumped. He went from stealing things to things that just disgust me. But
yeah.
as Walter mentioned, he was married, right? But albeit
Mm,
for a very short period of time. Though, according to reports, a divorce wasn't final, and the couple were just pretty much separated. And you have to
mm.
understand, back then, divorces were sort of a taboo, and
Still
especially
kind
if
of a
you
taboo, isn't it?
I mean, it's getting better now. I think it's getting
Yeah.
better. I mean, no one's gonna, you're not gonna be the outcast of a village or a town because you got a divorce, right? But back
Mm,
then, remember, you talked about how, being in Hwasong and stuff, like a very small area in Hwasong, if you get divorced, everyone's gonna be talking about this because it's
yeah.
still a taboo back then. Well, E's wife at the time described him to be an alcoholic and a very violent person.
Mm,
But this didn't stop him from interacting with his wife's family. And I loosely use that word
yes.
because in early January 1993, Lee Chun-jae invites his sister-in-law over to his house. And once she was inside, she was drugged, raped, and basically killed her. So again, he went from being arrested for burglary to raping and killing his sister-in-law. And so
Mhm.
after the killing, his father-in-law was obviously worried, and he acted the fool and said he would help find her. He was investigated, arrested a few days later, and it was originally sentenced to death in May of 1994. But that was reduced to life the following year with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Case over, right? Well, they wouldn't make a movie on a murderer who just killed one person. And remember, we're not even really gotten into the real thing just yet.
Yeah.
And this is a big one. If
Yeah.
they had went with the death sentence,
Mm,
and around this time, I think was when people were still getting the death penalty and they were getting
mm,
hung and stuff like that. If he got the death penalty,
mm.
there would have been someone who is completely innocent that could have had just his life completely changed because of this. And we're going to be talking about why that whole sentencing being reduced from death sentence to a life sentence really changed the tide of this particular story. So, nevertheless, let's talk about what's going on here, why there was a movie called Memoirs of a Murder or Memories of a Murder based on this particular killer.
Yes, this is very interesting. And the fact that, yes, he went from going from one petty crime to this very heinous crime of his sister-in-law. He was like, no, it wasn't me. But then obviously with his history, I guess it wouldn't have been too hard to find him. But yes, during the 80s, the Korean police technology was not great. I mean, even in other countries, more developed countries at the time, like America or Australia or Europe, some places in Europe, Korean police technology wasn't great. And DNA was not regularly used at that time, I
No,
believe.
I think that only the U.S. had DNA technology. Korea didn't at the time.
Yeah. So back then there was also a lot of corruption, a lot of bad eggs, as we mentioned in the Yu Yong-chol case. That they weren't the smartest force out there. Especially with Hwasong. I can't imagine that even small country towns would have had great police officers.
No.
It would have been difficult, but what the police were most terrible at, and it's possibly the most important thing, is collecting evidence.
Yeah.
So, you can't go into a crime scene. You have to be properly wearing, their attire, handled, stored correctly. And this was no different when the body of a 13-year-old girl who had been raped in July of 1989. Now, a year goes by then, and they go, well, we're still looking into this case. And they wind up at a 22-year-old by the name of Yoon Song-yo, who is living in this house. Now, they ask him to go down to the station with him, or like together, where they question him over like a 3-day period. Now, they think, obviously, this person did it. But the way that they did it was through, let's say, not so much ethical
No.
standards of interrogating someone.
Let's just say they had no cameras back then, or they covered the cameras up.
Yes, exactly. So, they wanted to get to the bottom of this 13-year-old girl's death. They found what they thought was the suspect, and finally, Yoon gives in a confession. And he is convicted of raping and murdering the young girl and was sentenced to life in prison. Now, as I mentioned, Hwasong was a small rural town, a population of around that time, I believe it was like 220,000, and that was before 1986. Now, it was not an area that saw a lot of crime, as I mentioned, between mid-September 1986 and early April 1991. A lot was happening in the small town, and that was when everything was in chaos. Now, it will be too long for me to go into detail about all the crimes that happened. But SJ, you have a list there. Can you just run through some of the things that happened between mid-September 1986 and early April 1991?
Yeah, I just want to add just one thing. Hwasong was more than a town. Hwasong is technically a city.
Yeah.
So you could kind of imagine a city with only 220,000 people. There's going to be a vast area of land, farmland, and in fact, even though Hwasong City it's developed a whole lot since the 80s and so forth, but there's still a whole lot of farmland there, and these farm areas are going to be most of these crime scenes that we're going to talk about. So all of these deaths were again located around or in Hwasong, and as Walter mentioned, it was 1986 and 1991, and so these are some of the victims in September 19th, 1986. Man, this is about a few months away before I was born. A 71-year-old female found in a pasture, strangled to death, no semen found. All right, and these are all big stuff here. October 23rd, 1986. So just over a month after, a 25-year-old female found in a canal, strangled to death. Again, very similar, right? Semen was found, but DNA evidence could not be determined. We go back to the whole idea, getting DNA evidence, DNA testing was very difficult.
Yes.
December 12th, 1986. All right, we're getting there. 3 days before I'm born. 25-year-old female found in an embankment, strangled by stocking, gagged with her stocking, underwear left on her face, semen found. But again, DNA evidence could not be determined. But DNA evidence, again, not widely available at the time. And I believe the United States had the technology, but that would have meant that sending in the evidence over to the United States and, getting the test, it would have taken a really, really long time. And so the list goes on to name 11 more victims. But there was one thing that kept coming up with all of these murders, and it was the way that the murders were being carried out. Again, all of them, they were strangled, many of whom were gagged with their own underwear. Okay. Many were found to have semen present in or on them, but only 2 were positive to have B-type blood in them. Now, the police tried everything to try and catch the serial killer, even down to dressing up a female officer to kind of lure him out. I think it was they're trying to find. We saw this in the movies, Memoirs of the Murder, where they said it was usually when it was raining. It was they were targeting women that were wearing certain colors. They were even saying, but except for the 13-year-old girl case, the case goes unsolved for many years until. What happens next, Walter?
Well, that's the thing. Yes, the 13-year-old case goes unsolved for many years, but come to present day. And when I say present day, I don't mean that long ago.
No.
I mean July 2019. So 4 years ago. So around 4 years ago. Police who were still on the case sent I don't know how this wasn't done earlier, but yes, they sent evidence to the National Forensic Service of DNA testing. This is 30 years they had this evidence and they just sent it. And guess what they found? DNA from 3 of the murders in Hwasong. And who was it linked to? Was it linked to that 22-year-old boy with the surname Yoon Song-yeol? Or was it connected to someone else? And as you may have already guessed, it was linked to Lee Choon-Jae. Now, remember, Lee Choon-Jae was only in jail for murdering and raping his sister-in-law. Now, at that time, that's all he was known for amongst the police. They didn't suspect him of anything else.
Right.
He was just the person who, raped, killed his sister-in-law. Well, now they have 3 murders solved with Lee's name attached to them, plus murdering his sister-in-law, so that's 4. And the 13-year-old girl in Hwasong was also solved years ago, and with Yoon's name attached to her, like it said, so that leaves 10 more victims that have gone unsolved. Well, the police only had to wait 1 more month to find out who was responsible for the remaining victims, as E confessed to 10 remaining victims plus 4 others that the police did not discover. But one of the most shocking confessions was that the 13-year-old girl who had Yoon Song-yeol's name attached to it was actually done by Lee Choon-Jae. So Yoon spent 20 years in jail for no reason.
Yeah, so you might be wondering, well, I mean, guys, earlier in the show, episode, you were talking about how Yoon confessing to the crime. But remember, not only were the police very bad at getting evidence at the time, but they were using basically fear tactics to get the confession out of them. Basically going, we already know you did it. There's, it's only going to make it easier if you just confess. But we're going to get that answer out of you because there was so much pressure from the public for the police not being able to solve all of these murder crimes. And they go, why are the police there? And so they need some sort of, I guess, go out on the news and say that, they finally arrested a murderer, right? And so they're using any tactic possible. They're doing the whole the phone book tactic. They're beating him up. And so Yoon basically tired, hurt, and exhausted, basically goes, you know what? It doesn't seem like they're gonna end this. So
Mm.
fine, I killed this person, and it's just he was innocent. He didn't do anything, right? And so we also go back to the whole idea: if, let's say, the death sentence on Lee Choon-Jae, right, was upheld, and he basically gets the death sentence. I don't know, he gets hung and stuff like that. Well, who's to know, right?
Yeah.
There's a very good chance that Yoon Sung-yeol would never be found not guilty of his past crime.
Yeah.
We
Right.
would have never known all the other things that have happened. And so, yeah, Yoon, rightfully so, filed a claim with the Suwon District Court to be compensated for 20 years of wrongful imprisonment. He was asking of upwards of 2.5 billion Korean won, which is estimated to be around a little bit more than 2 million US dollars. But he came out in a television show shortly after being released, because he was, he was garnering somewhat of a fame here in Korea, because again, this guy was the guy that was in jail, and then he's been released because of a very notorious killer that they just recently found. And so he came out in a show, I think it's called Eye Contact or something like that. And he was saying the person he wanted to meet after his release was one of the correctional facility officer who he said treated him like a human being. Because everyone else were like, I mean, this guy raped and killed a 13-year-old girl, and he kept on saying he's innocent, but no one was listening to him. He said that correctional officer was the only one who said, listen, you might be right. I might believe you, but you have to keep this up, keep fighting. I know there's at times things are looking very dark and you might not want to live, but listen, just keep your head up. And who knows, maybe there's going to be a miracle. And the miracle did happen. And so he's come out on television a few times. I'm not sure 100% unsure whether or not he was compensated. Sure, he should be.
He should
but,
be.
I mean, a 30-year-old murder case that no one knew about and just basically gave up was solved like this, and also led to the release of an innocent person. Crazy stuff.
That's the thing. Like, and if you watch any, if you've been to jail, or if you've watched any jail documentaries or whatever, you know that the child molesters, they are like the ones that everyone attacks.
Right.
Like, they are the ones that get like beaten up the most. They're the ones who get like abused the most. They're the ones that get treated badly. But the fact is that Yoon, he wasn't that person at all. And he was 20 years in prison. How do you get 20 years back? And how, like, even, okay, 2.2-ish million US dollars. I don't even know if that's enough compensation. Like,
yeah,
it's a lot of money, but still 20 years of someone's life gone for nothing that they did wrong. And the torture he went through. And
Walter, you have to understand, it wasn't just Yoon's life that changed. It was also his family, his parents.
Yeah.
Because they're going, my goodness, did my son really confess to a murder, a rape and a murder of a 13-year-old girl? And because he was found guilty, right, because of his confession that, again, wasn't a real confession, they spent basically 30 years, right? Not a little less than 30, was it? 20 years, right? 20 years of people in their neighborhoods going, man, did you hear about the Yoons? Their son raped and killed a 13-year-old girl. I mean, their life certainly wasn't the same.
Yeah,
and
Koreans like to gossip about like other people's children a lot. So
yeah,
that would have been the worst.
And the crazy thing with this is Yoon had come out again. He had minor celebrity status after he was released, and so Yoon came out and said he at least thought maybe his family members would believe him when he said he didn't, rape and kill a 13-year-old girl. I think his parents had, but he was saying that it was his uncles and aunts who said, yeah, you know what? He probably did. Oh, it's such a shame. Didn't believe him. And so he said coming back home, remember, this guy's been in prison for 20 years and he's in his 20s back then. And he went back to his parents' home and he said he couldn't look at the faces of his relatives because they had all thought that he had killed him. They didn't believe him initially. And so he's kind of restarting relationship with his relatives right now. I mean, life really isn't the same for this guy.
I mean, how could you really? I mean, 20 years in jail, your family turning their back on you. It'd be hard to go back. I mean, to be honest with you, this is like the biggest twist in any murder like story I've ever heard. It's just such a big twist.
Yeah.
And not to give away the movie, but they definitely should remake it because the movie doesn't give the whole case justice. Like it's not exactly verbatim of the movie in the case. However, yeah, I mean, the twist for this murder case, it just couldn't get any bigger in Korea, I think, especially with the amount of years being in jail.
Yeah, again, I mean, it's just given the fact that it was unsolved for that long is what it is. And you know what? And what Lee Choon-Jae did, terrible stuff, right? Killing all those people. But you still have to give him credit where it's due. You know, he didn't have to confess to a whole bunch of them, you know?
Yeah, that's true.
And I think he came out saying that they were asking, hey, listen, you know, like, why did you confess to that the murder of the 13-year-old girl? And he said, well, I mean, it was the only right thing to do. I mean, the guy was innocent, you know?
Yeah.
And he probably didn't know that, you know, someone was arrested for a murder that he's done. But, you know, he said he felt guilty all the time. And kudos to him, right? You have to give him that. I mean, he's confessed to everything, and that led to the release of an innocent person. And so this brings up the whole idea of, you know, that whole death penalty, right? I mean, you and I, we talked about death penalty. We talked about how, you know, guys like, you know, Cho Do-soon, they should have been, you know, put into a death sentence, even though, you know, technically he didn't kill the victim. Or we talked about, you know, the Chung In-hee case where she did die. And so we were saying the adoptive parents should have gotten the death sentence and hang them right now, give them the electric chair, give them the injections, whatever it may be. But it's cases like this where you go, man, this is why maybe death penalty is something that Koreans right now, the Korean government hasn't done in years right now. Is because maybe back then DNA testing wasn't as good. They didn't have good police work back then. And maybe they'll find out that people that have put in jail many years ago turned out to be innocent.
You're absolutely right there, SJ. I mean, there's nothing else more to say, to be honest with you. I'm glad the guy is out, Yoon's out. I'm glad Lee Choon-Jae is still in. I guess the families now have clarity of what happened really to them. But this is where we're going to end it. I'm going to say, go watch that movie if you haven't seen it, Memories of a Murder. It's on Netflix, I believe, anyway. And we will hopefully not get hiccups or have family problems. So we'll be back next week, and we'll see you next week. Okay, SJ?
All right.